The restaurant was one of Harlem's quiet jewels, polished but understated. White tablecloths absorbed the warm glow of hanging lights. A pianist in the corner played softly, the kind of jazz that didn't demand attention but rewarded anyone who listened closely. This was a place where deals were whispered and reputations were understood without introductions. Duke Ellington sat comfortably at a round table near the center of the room. He wasn't dressed for spectacle, just elegance. A dark suit, perfectly tailored. Calm posture. The confidence of a man who didn't need to prove who he was. Around him were musicians, patrons, and friends, people who respected him not only as a composer, but as a symbol of Harlem's voice and dignity. Then the mood shifted. The door opened, and conversation thinned. A mob boss from downtown stepped inside, flanked loosely by two men who stayed near the entrance. He didn't scan the room for threats. He scanned it for recognition. When his eyes landed on Duke Ellington, a smile crept across his face, not friendly, not curious. Calculated. He walked over slowly, deliberately, letting people notice. He didn't ask permission to approach the table. He stopped beside Duke and leaned slightly forward, invading space without touching. His first comment sounded harmless, a remark about music, about fame. The second was sharper. The third wasn't a joke at all. It was the kind of remark designed to remind a man that applause didn't equal power. The laughter around the table died instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Eyes dropped. Duke Ellington didn't react, not because he was weak, but because responding would have given the moment legitimacy. The mob boss smirked, enjoying the silence. What he didn't realize was that the room wasn't quiet out of fear. It was quiet because someone else was already watching. Bumpy Johnson sat alone at a small table near the wall, positioned where he could see most of the room without being seen himself. He preferred it that way. Power, in his view, didn't need center stage, it needed awareness. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him, steam curling slowly upward as his eyes followed movement instead of people. He had noticed the mob boss the moment he walked in. Not because of fear. Because of intention. Bumpy watched as the man crossed the room with confidence that didn't belong there. Watched how conversations thinned as he passed. Watched the way people instinctively leaned away, not out of respect, but caution. That alone was enough to raise concern. Then Bumpy saw where the mob boss stopped. Duke Ellington's table. Bumpy didn't move right away. He didn't tense. He didn't react. His gaze stayed steady as he watched body language instead of words. The lean-in. The smile that didn't reach the eyes. The pause between comments, long enough to be deliberate. He saw Duke's posture stiffen, not defensive, just alert. Duke wasn't afraid. He was being tested. Bumpy understood the test immediately. This wasn't about Duke Ellington personally. It was about reminding the room who had power here. And that was something Bumpy Johnson would never allow to happen unchecked. Still, he waited. Bumpy believed in timing. Acting too fast made a scene. Acting too late invited chaos. The space between those moments was where control lived. He reached for his napkin and folded it slowly, carefully, placing it beside his cup. To anyone else, it was nothing. To the men who knew him, it was everything. Bumpy stood, not abruptly, but deliberately. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his shoulders, and began walking toward the table. The mob boss laughed again, unaware that the room's silence wasn't submission. It was anticipation. Because when Bumpy Johnson moved, something had already been decided. Bumpy Johnson stopped just short of Duke Ellington's table. He didn't insert himself immediately. He stood there for a half-second longer than necessary, long enough for the mob boss to notice him without feeling challenged. That pause mattered. It shifted the balance before a single word was spoken. The mob boss turned, irritation flashing across his face as his eyes met Bumpy's. He didn't recognize him at first. Not fully. Just another man interrupting what he believed was his moment. Bumpy spoke calmly, his voice low and even. "Why don't you step away from the table?" The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried weight because they weren't a request. The mob boss smirked, glancing around the room as if expecting laughter or agreement. He saw neither. The silence had grown heavier. His men near the door shifted slightly, but not forward. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked, forcing humor into his tone. Bumpy smiled faintly. "Not friendly. Not threatening. Certain. I'm the man telling you this ends now." That was when recognition hit. Not loudly, quietly. The mob boss studied Bumpy's face more closely. The posture. The lack of tension. The complete absence of fear. This wasn't bravado. This was experience. The mob boss leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't run this place." Bumpy nodded once, accepting the statement without argument. "No," he said. "But I decide what happens after." He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements. No rush. He withdrew a straight razor, folded shut, resting easily in his palm. He didn't raise it. He didn't aim it. He simply let it exist. Then Bumpy leaned in just enough to be heard. "You leave now," he said quietly, "or this becomes something you can't walk away from." The mob boss swallowed. For the first time that night, he understood he wasn't in control. And he never would be. For a moment, no one moved. The razor remained closed in Bumpy Johnson's palm, resting there like an idea rather than a weapon. It wasn't the steel that commanded attention, it was the calm behind it. Bumpy's hand didn't shake. His breathing didn't change. His eyes never left the mob boss's face. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys, uncertain. Conversations that had resumed softly after the initial interruption now vanished completely. Even the clink of glasses stopped. The room understood something important was unfolding, even if no one dared name it. The mob boss tried to smile again, but this time it didn't hold. His eyes flicked toward the door where his men stood. They hadn't stepped forward. They hadn't reached inside their jackets. They hadn't done anything at all. That was the answer. He cleared his throat and straightened his coat, as if resetting the moment. "Just having a little fun," he said lightly, too lightly. "No harm meant." No one responded. Bumpy didn't nod. He didn't accept the explanation. He simply waited. That waiting was heavier than any threat. The mob boss took a step back from the table. Then another. He laughed once, short, forced, and gestured vaguely, as if the entire scene had been a misunderstanding. But the room didn't move with him. It stayed exactly where it was, eyes following him as he retreated. He turned and walked toward the exit. His men fell in behind him without hesitation, faces tight, movements quick. The door opened. Cold air slipped in. Then they were gone. The door closed. Only then did the room exhale. Bumpy closed the razor and slipped it back into his pocket as casually as if he'd checked the time. He turned slightly toward Duke Ellington, gave a small nod, not seeking thanks, not expecting praise. Just acknowledgement. Then Bumpy returned to his table, picked up his coffee, and took a slow sip. The pianist resumed playing. The night went on. But nothing in that room would ever feel quite the same again. The restaurant slowly returned to life, but it wasn't the same life it had known before. Conversations resumed in lower tones. Laughter sounded cautious, measured. Everyone understood they had witnessed something rare, not violence, but authority exercised with precision. Bumpy Johnson finished his coffee without urgency. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't acknowledge the attention. Men like Bumpy never checked for reactions, they created them. Duke Ellington remained seated for a moment, hands resting calmly on the table. When he stood, the people nearby rose instinctively, not out of fear, but respect. He crossed the short distance to Bumpy's table and extended his hand. "Thank you," Duke said quietly. Bumpy took the hand briefly, firm but unremarkable, and nodded once. "Harlem looks after its own," he replied. There was no ceremony. No exchange of praise. Two men who understood dignity had said everything that needed to be said. By the time Bumpy left the restaurant, the story had already begun to travel. Not exaggerated. Not embellished. Just repeated carefully, exactly as it had happened. A mob boss had crossed a line. Bumpy Johnson had drawn it back into place. That was the part people remembered. From that night on, mob figures still operated in Harlem. Business continued. Money flowed. But behavior changed. Artists were left alone. Disrespect disappeared. Not because of fear alone, but because boundaries had been made visible. Bumpy Johnson didn't gain power that night. He confirmed it. Years later, people would argue whether the razor had been necessary, whether words alone might have worked. But those arguments missed the point entirely. The razor wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. In Harlem, talent was protected. Dignity mattered. And power, real power, didn't need to raise its voice. Because when Bumpy Johnson spoke softly, the entire room listened.